Hey everybody, welcome to our session, Understanding Sensory Processing and Dementia, Tips for Enriching Sensory Experiences in the Home. This session is part of ComForCare and At Your Side Home Care's comprehensive Dementia Wise program. The goal of Dementia Wise is to enhance the lives of those living with dementia, as well as provide support and education for their family caregivers and healthcare professionals. My name is Heather McKay. I'm an occupational therapist and dementia care specialist. On behalf of ComForCare and At Your Side Home Care, I'd like to thank you for listening and learning about sensory processing and dementia. As you gather information about sensory-aware care for people with dementia and find ways to apply it in your own life, I hope you'll share your knowledge and experience with friends, neighbors, your family, and professional caregivers that you know. In our time together, I'll share information and tips that I've collected along the way. In my own experience, working with people with dementia and their myriad caregivers in home health, hospice, community-based practice, dementia workforce development, and caring for a beloved family member of my own. These are some things that I think every person needs to know about sensory processing and dementia, whether you're thinking about your own brain or supporting people you know living with the disease. So spread the word. Before we begin, allow me to preview the agenda and a few housekeeping items. Our purpose today is threefold. We're here together to share knowledge about sensory processing and dementia, raise awareness about common challenges that may arise when sensory processing changes, and helpful tips to reduce or avoid the problem, and support families like yours, adapting with dementia with sensory-aware care that's more effective and satisfying for everybody involved. This webinar is for educational purposes only. The information provided is not intended to be diagnostic or serve as a substitute for client-centered medical advice. If you have concerns about your loved one's health or diagnosis, or your own health, please seek evaluation from a licensed medical professional. As I mentioned, this session is brought to you by ComForCare and At Your Side Home Care. ComForCare and At Your Side have over 200 locations, both in the U.S. and Canada, providing non-medical home care, companionship, and personal care services. Our home care teams specialize in dementia care and fall risk management. If you or your family needs more assistance at home, or you just want to learn more about home care, we welcome your contact. For those of you, like me, who like to see the roadmap before we begin, I've listed objectives in the order that we'll cover them today. By the end of this program, you'll be able to define sensory processing and compare how it happens in a healthy brain versus a brain with dementia. Explain the importance of recognizing and addressing sensory changes for people living with dementia. Specify 8 senses and how each may be impacted by dementia. Recognize common situations when impaired sensory processing in any or all of those senses could make participation in everyday activities harder for your loved one with dementia. And finally, identify strategies to enhance your loved one's participation by enriching their sensory experience. So let's get started with some basic neuroscience to help us think about sensory processing and dementia. Now, since none of us are training to be brain surgeons today, I like to break down the science into plain explanations that we can all share with friends and family. A quick vocabulary lesson is helpful at the start. The term sensory processing, also called sensory integration, refers to the whole brain-body process of gathering, organizing, processing, and integrating all the sensory information from the body and the environment. Now, simply put, this means how we experience, interpret, and react to, or sometimes ignore, information coming from our senses. Sensory processing is important in all the things that we do on a daily basis, such as getting dressed, eating, moving around, socializing, learning, and working, just to name a few. Well, pictures are helpful when it comes to explaining how sensory processing works. See, The central nervous system is a two-way street. Sensory input gathered from the body travels up the spinal cord to the brain. Sensory message travels up using the incoming lanes. Once sensory messages reach the brain, those incoming lanes split off and head to separate and specific parts of the brain for processing. See, different sensations are interpreted in different areas of the brain. For instance, vision, mostly processed in the back, the occipital lobe. Touch, from your skin, gets processed at the top, in the parietal lobe. Sounds, processed on the side, close to your ear. Smell is processed deep in the front, behind your nose. Well, after all that organizing and processing, decisions are made about the meaning of it all in the frontal lobe. And then, motor commands are sent back out the body to move and respond to the situation appropriately. See, motor signals travel down the spinal cord on the outgoing lanes. So traffic on this two-way street stays constantly moving. If you look at the picture, the healthy brain is on top. Notice all those white pathways in the healthy brain. Those pathways are your sensory motor superhighways. Now notice how the highways cover the whole area. Sensory and motor signals are zooming in every direction, up and down, zipping side to side, crossing that huge bridge between the two hemispheres. All this sensory motor traffic reminds me of the major highways that converge in a big city. Down here in the South, there's a particular busy interchange in Atlanta called, anybody know? Spaghetti Junction. Your healthy sensory integration uses the whole spaghetti junction in your brain. Now, look at the brain with dementia at the bottom. Sensory motor pathways are reduced by number and size. The frontal lobe, also shrinking. So managing all that traffic, organizing it, and deciding how to respond just isn't what it used to be. Check it out. Spaghetti Junction is reduced to one little dirt road that barely reaches the destination. Only a few signals cross the single little bridge to the other side. So, what does that mean? Less sensory information comes in. Processing is slower. Interpreting is more difficult. And motor responses going out are less accurate. It's harder for people living with dementia to understand the world around them and act on it the way they once did. Now that we've seen the basic neuroscience, it makes sense. Your family member with dementia may experience a wide range of sensory-related problems, not necessarily due to any particular problem with the sensory organ itself, but with the brain's ability to process the information that the sensory organ sends in. In other words, your loved one's eyes, ears, nose, etc. could be working just fine, but the brain doesn't understand the incoming messages the way it once did. Well, knowing that, who's thinking there could be more than one link between sensory-related problems and dementia? Yeah, one caregiver daughter said to me, "Heather, when it comes to hearing, my dad has a double whammy. Dad's brain is not processing everything he hears, and he's also hard of hearing." Another caregiver said, "Same here. I'm taking care of my wife who's got eye problems." He said she's got glaucoma. So she already sees less, and on top of that, her brain doesn't understand everything she does see. So we've covered the first link. Sensory processing changes with dementia. Whatever the baseline function of the sensory organ itself is, understanding that sensory information is more difficult for the person with dementia. And the second link, or double whammy, for many, is that your loved one could have pre-existing sensory problems plus dementia. Any sensory problem present in addition to dementia now presents an extra challenge for the person's changing brain. For example, your family member may have hearing loss due to years of factory work or poor vision because of macular degeneration or some other condition, or poor touch sensation in their hands or feet due to diabetes. Any of those sensory problems would be complicated by their dementia. In a nutshell, it's harder to live with dementia when you have sensory loss, and it's harder to cope with sensory loss when you have dementia. Well, we're really connecting the dots here between sensation and dementia, and there's one more important factor to consider about how our senses help us manage ourselves and the environment. See, we all have sensory preferences. We just like things the way we like them. You could think of your sensory preferences like a diet. Some people take their sensory experiences on the mild side, while others order up the big and rich super spicy brand. That really packs a punch. Along the spectrum, from mild to big and bold, you might notice patterns in your own sensory choices. Let me offer a few examples before I ask you to think about what you've noticed about your own sensory preferences and choices. See, I recognize about myself that I usually prefer fairly mild sensory experiences. For example, I love sports, but mostly choose to watch. Growing up, I was always a fan of aggressive sports, but didn't really want to hit the floor myself. Well, my husband, on the other hand, enjoyed playing football as a kid. When I met him in his 30s, he was still riding a skateboard down a flight of stairs or jumping obstacles on that BMX bike. Now, these are sensory experiences that I would never try for the first time, let alone rehearse them again and again. Well, our sensory preferences also play out in our career choices. As I moved between school and work roles, I stayed mostly indoors, reading, typing, talking to people. Honestly, a nice sensory stimulation for me is a walk outside in the late afternoon. You might call that a medium sensory experience, and personally, I prefer to warm up to it later in the day. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a problem because all of these differences are still in the range of normal. I have certainly managed my fair share of rich sensory experiences, I'm sure you have, so this is not all or nothing proposition. It's just a matter of preference. As a healthcare worker, I've done some high-intensity work in hospitals and long-term care, working on my feet for long hours and tolerating different sounds and smells and uncomfortable positions. But nothing for me is demanding on my sensory system as some of my nurse colleagues who choose to scrub into the operating room or hit the road and the skies to be first responders on the scene. Oh, yeah, and that sensory-seeking husband, no surprise, he's a carpenter. We can rest assured that it takes all kinds of sensory processors to make the world go round, and many different preferences and choices are normal. Now, I want you to think to yourself for a minute. Consider your own sensory preferences. Is there a particular sensory experience that you especially like or don't like? Does the time or rhythm of the day factor into your preferences? Well, thinking about your own sensory preferences, I'm curious what you've noticed about yourself. Maybe you choose certain clothing based on how it feels. Maybe you gravitate towards certain settings because they just feel right to you. Have you ever adjusted the lighting to change the vibe in a place? Or do you like food just a certain way? Maybe you're like me and choose differently depending on the time of day. Well, thinking to yourself one more time about the differences you see in others around you. Do you know someone with different sensory preferences? Reflecting on those other sensory choices, what do you notice? Perhaps you see your partner choosing something very different than you. Maybe you notice one of the kids picking a sensory experience that you would not enjoy. Or has anybody noticed their coworkers arranging the sensory environment in their offices differently? Maybe you've got a loved one with dementia who has other sensory likes and dislikes. Well, this is what I call expert noticing. You're all aware of your own and others' behavior and thinking about what those behaviors mean. Today, we're looking at the way we all experience the world through a sensory lens, a perspective that offers some new ideas about why your loved one with dementia does what they do, and how we might create experiences that are better suited for those who have different needs and preferences. Let's recap this section briefly before we move on. Sensory processing is a whole brain-body process of gathering, organizing, and interpreting sensory input on incoming pathways, and integrating sensory with motor responses on outgoing pathways. People living with dementia have reduced capacity to interpret sensory input and move or respond. Recognizing patterns and preferences for sensory experiences, including type, timing, and intensity, can help caregivers tailor sensory experiences. You're probably already guessing that there could be some real benefits to recognizing and addressing sensory changes in dementia care. So let me share some of the positive impacts of what we call sensory-aware care. When sensory changes are compounded by memory loss and communication breakdowns, then it's difficult for the person with dementia to understand the world around them and respond or behave the way they always did. But when caregivers, families, and pros are sensory aware, they can improve day-to-day life, make participation easier and more satisfying for the person they're supporting and themselves, decrease risks like falls, sleep disturbances, medication errors, and enhance relationships between the person with dementia and their friends, family, and care partners. Family caregivers, everyone on your team can create a good habit of thinking, if my person with dementia is exhibiting a challenging behavior or having trouble doing something they want or need to do, an uncomfortable or mismatched sensory experience may be the root cause of the problem. Family, here's the good news. There are many effective strategies to compensate for sensory losses and maximize your loved one's strengths. More good news is, we can all become expert noticers and help others notice signs of a sensory-related problem. See, certain behaviors may signal your loved one's sensory needs and preferences. When we have a solid understanding of sensory changes and dementia and a toolbox of strategies to enrich sensory experiences, our family members with dementia may enjoy more opportunities to participate in meaningful activities tailored to their sensory needs and preferences, create better days with those around them, and live more fully throughout the progression of dementia. Even more good news is that caregivers like you and me can develop a keen eye for behavioral symptoms of dementia and reduce many of those challenging behaviors with safe, effective, sensory-based interventions. See, sensory-aware caregivers can minimize potentially dangerous behavioral medications and ease their own caregiver burden. So the take-home message on why we want to notice and address sensory-related problems for people with dementia is that it's a great opportunity to preserve participation in meaningful activities, reduce multiple risks, including falls, improve overall health, and ease those caregivers' burdens. The consensus is managing sensory experiences improves the quality of life for people with dementia and their caregivers and can potentially delay institutionalization. And as family and home care teams, that is speaking our language. Quick summary of this section. Sensory changes are expected for people living with dementia. Impaired sensory processing can pose serious consequences for the person and their caregivers. And sensory processing breakdowns are a common root cause of challenging behavioral symptoms. So addressing those sensory needs and preferences, also known as providing sensory-aware care, can reduce multiple risks and improve quality of life for everyone involved. Okay, we're building on your knowledge of basic neuroscience. We're deepening your awareness of the benefits of sensory-aware care. Next, we can flesh out the intervention approach, the how-to behind sensory-aware care. But before I fill your toolbox with practical, ready-to-use strategies, it might help you generate some good ideas of your own if we first think for a minute about what it would feel like to live with some of these sensory changes common in dementia. Let's consider all 8 senses today. Now, obviously, some of the senses are common knowledge, but a few might be new to some folks. It may also be news to some people about where on the body some sensations are gathered. Now, obviously, the well-known senses are like vision, information collected through your eyes, hearing, signals coming from your ears, taste, what you gather with your tongue and mouth, smell, that's your nose, that's easy. Touch. Now, it's not just your hands, that's everything detected by your whole skin. This one might not be on everybody's radar because we don't always think of our whole skin as a sensory organ, but it is. It covers the whole body, and it gathers tons of sensory input from light touch to deep pressure to hot and cold, itchy, tingly, everything you can imagine feeling on the surface of your body. Another lesser-known sensation is balance, or the vestibular system. Your sense of balance and stability is gathered in your inner ear. In your healthy brain, your vestibular sense is determined largely by the position of your head, because that's where the inner ear mechanism is located. If you shake your head, or if you spin around, or if you ride in a car through a twisty route, or you bob up and down on a rocking boat, your sense of balance and stability will be affected. In those situations, even a healthy vestibular system will have some trouble. Some of you may have felt seasick or car sick before. That's your vestibular system talking to you. Another time that you might have noticed your vestibular system in a bit of bother is if you drink a little too much alcohol. Now tell me that I'm not the only one who's ever noticed the room is spinning. I'm a little unsteady on my feet, or I don't feel so good. Okay, you've probably all noticed your vestibular system at some point, one way or the other. 2 more sensations that might be underappreciated. One is your body's position in space. It's called proprioception, and the information is gathered in all your joints. See, your joints tell you what your body's doing. One of the best ways to appreciate your proprioception is to test it with your eyes closed. Check it out. I can close my eyes and tell you exactly how my body is positioned without even looking. Right now, my elbows are bent with my hands sort of at shoulder level. My head is facing straight ahead. My fingers are spread wide. I just closed my hands in a fist. I know that because my joints are sending information to my brain about the position of my body parts. That's all sensory information coming from the proprioception. It's hard to imagine not knowing your body position if you have a healthy brain. Try to think of a time when this could have been a problem. Your body awareness could be a little off if that glass of wine is playing tricks on your brain. Have you ever watched a party goer dancing after one too many drinks and thought, I'm not sure they know what they look like? That can be funny. Another example is when your foot goes to sleep. Remember when you tried to stand on your foot, but you couldn't feel your foot's position? Yeah, like until the circulation returned to that body part, the proprioceptive sense there was temporarily altered. Well, the 8th and final sensory system is called interoception. Now, this is the internal signals that your body detects from your internal organs. So nobody ever thinks about this one when they're talking about sensations like sight and sound and taste and touch. But your interoceptive system tells you that your stomach is hurting or you have a headache. Thanks to this sensory system, you get a little signal from your body that you better find a bathroom in the near future. Thank goodness for interoception. It also tells you that your heart is racing because you're nervous or anxious or excited or in the mood, shall we say. Now, aren't you really glad that this whole brain processing is getting all of these signals from your whole body, making appropriate decisions and responding with socially appropriate behavior? Yeah, I am so grateful for the sensory receptors in all of these organs sending messages to my brain. A healthy brain learns what these messages mean and how to respond appropriately. For people living with dementia, problems arise when the brain can't detect or misinterprets the information. See, with regard to vision, that means a shrinking visual field. They get less information from the peripheral vision. They might have visual hallucinations, that's common, when they misinterpret things that they see, as well as poor discrimination, which means they might have trouble seeing an object separate from the background. When it comes to hearing, some sounds are missing, while other sounds might be startling or overwhelming. Noise is a major distractor because they might have trouble tuning out the noise to just pick out what they want or need to hear. With the taste sensation, some tastes may be lost while others just overpower. They may not recognize a bad taste and accidentally eat something spoiled or even toxic. Same with smell. They may not smell good things, which further messes with their ability to taste their favorite foods. But they may also have trouble detecting dangerous odors. If the sensation throughout the skin is affected, then light touch can feel painful. It's common for older adults to have more trouble regulating temperature. It's just a part of normal aging. Well, when this sensory processing problem is layered on the pre-existing challenge, that temperature control is a big hurdle. Well, now that you know more about the vestibular balance sense in your inner ear, you can imagine that your loved one with dementia could feel like they're falling at times or like the room is spinning. When signals are mixed up coming from the joints of the body, proprioception is off, and they could make unsafe movements or misinterpret their body's position. Wondering if you've noticed that. Finally, decreased interoception can create a whole list of problems a mile long. After today, you might notice more instances of your loved one with dementia unaware of internal signals like, I'm hungry, thirsty, or fatigue or anxiety, or they might feel like something's wrong, but they can't quite put their finger on it, can't figure out what the internal signal means or what to do about it. Here at ComForCare, we're always helping caregivers become more sensory aware, and one particular experiential learning activity is a favorite of our home care teams. See, here's how it works. You might try this at home with other caregivers on your team. We just take a few minutes and try on some of these sensory changes using inexpensive everyday items that you probably have around the house. The idea is to see what sort of thoughts come to mind when you feel some of these sensory breakdowns firsthand. See, I always start with a little bag of items called a sensory kit. I'll show you how to change your sensory experience using the items in the bag and ask you to imagine what it would be like to experience the world this way. In my sensory kit, I have an empty plastic bag, a little package of earplugs or cotton balls will do, a pair of vinyl gloves. I've got my kitchen gloves today, an individually wrapped mint candy, and an individually wrapped piece of chocolate. And finally, a small bag of split peas. I'll tell you what to do with them. I'll demonstrate the sensory changes one at a time, but keep in mind that people living with dementia may experience all of these problems at once. So feel free to layer your sensory challenges if you're trying this at home. First, let's imagine drastically different vision. Take the plastic sandwich bag and place it over your eyes. If you have glasses, you might be able to hold the plastic bag in place with your glasses. Now, looking through 2 layers of plastic approximates 20/60 vision or presbyopia. If you wear glasses with a strong prescription, you might achieve this feeling of low vision simply by taking off your glasses. Now, let's shrink your visual field. You might keep the plastic on your face for this. You can shrink your visual field by placing your hands like binoculars over your eyes. Everybody can do this, even if you're not simulating the low vision with the plastic. Shrink your visual field by putting up your binoculars. In this position, take a moment, look around. What do you notice about your peripheral vision? Now imagine you're sitting at the dining room table. Got your binoculars on? Okay. Can you see the plate that's right in front of you? Can you see anything that's right under your nose for that matter? No. With this shrunken visual field, whose plate do you see better? Yeah, that's right. You see your neighbor's plate. Has anybody ever noticed your loved one with dementia reaching for things across the table? Something to think about. Now, let's layer that sensory experience with missing sounds. Some of you might still have the plastic on your eyes or your glasses removed for low vision. You can put the earplugs in and see how that changes the experience. If you're trying this at home, leave these in for now. Now, diminished light touch and fine motor coordination next. Watch what happens when I put on the gloves. The gloves simulate difficulty with light touch and fine motor coordination. When you've got your gloves on, see how that changes your ability to open the mint candy. Now we're going to work with the mints first. It takes a while to open it with these gloves on. I want you to eat the mint candy first. When our caregivers try this together, they notice that their hands don't feel as coordinated or efficient with that simple task. And they reflect on all the everyday tasks that would take more time if your hands didn't work so well. Now we're starting to think about trouble distinguishing food flavors. With that first candy in your mouth, you're getting a pretty strong mint flavor. You might imagine how difficult it would be to distinguish other flavors over the mint. Let's try that now with the second candy. First, I've got to open it. It's a little bit tricky with the gloves on, you know. Once you have the candy open, I want you to hold your nose and put the chocolate in your mouth. You'll probably notice a diminished taste sensation for chocolate because chocolate is one of the many foods whose taste is enhanced by smell. Just imagine if the taste for lots of favorite foods were lost. How would that impact your desire to eat and eventually your overall nutrition and health? The last part simulates a vestibular problem with foot pain or discomfort because those are common challenges that we see. I'll just explain this step for now. Feel free to try it at home. I asked my teammates to place the split peas in their shoes and leave them there for the last part of the activity. If the peas are in a small bag like this, you can just slide the bag into your shoe. To simulate dizziness, they take 3 to 4 rotations. So I ask them to stand and spin in a circle just as fast as they feel safe. Then try to take a few steps. This exercise mimics the dizziness, difficulty with motor planning, and sensation that may be associated with pre-existing sensory problems like painful arthritis or bunions on your feet, plus poor sensory processing caused by the dementia. All the problems combined can drastically limit mobility, and my partners all notice how this feeling affects their gait or pace of ambulation and their risk for falls. For those who layered the sensory experiences, you can remove all the barriers. Take the plastic off your face, remove the earplugs. After an experience like that, I'm always inspired by caregivers' empathy, insights, and ideas for more sensory-aware care. Feel free to give that a try with other caregivers that you know. With those sensory struggles in mind, here are some helpful tips that you can try to reduce the sensory demand on the person with dementia. First, when it comes to vision, it's important to assist your family member to get routine eye exams and to help them wear their glasses. Take care to approach the person from the front to avoid startling. Remember, they aren't processing as much of the peripheral vision. Imagine the visual field is approximately 14 inches, about the size of a dinner plate. Remember that tunnel vision. Notice where the person's looking and try to present items in their visual field. If an object appears scary or confusing, try covering, removing, or shining more light on the object. If reflections appear scary or confusing, try covering the windows before dark. Consider removing or just downsizing mirrors. If finding things around a busy background is challenging for them, try removing the clutter, presenting items one at a time, and/or add some color contrast. Similarly, when your person's not processing sounds the way they once did, there are some simple tips that could make doing things together easier for you both. First, you can assist with your family member to get a formal hearing assessment by an audiologist. You can also help them wear their hearing aids. If possible, ensure they can see you and use more visual cues and gestures when you speak. Get on the person's level when you speak. If they're seated, have a seat next to them. Try to eliminate competing noises in the room or around the house. In other words, turn off the TV when nobody's watching it. If sounds seem overwhelming or disruptive, try headphones with their favorite music, or actually noise-canceling headphones can be helpful for relaxation. Now, heads up, acoustics can be harsh in some rooms, especially the bathroom and some public dining rooms. So move closer to the person so as not to shout. Consider research-informed listening interventions like the Safe and Sound Protocol. I wonder if any of you have heard of this program. It's actually a specially designed playlist tuned in a specific way to reduce the brain's stress response. You can think of it like a dose of safety taken just by listening. You can look up that program by name, Safe and Sound, and investigate similar listening programs. Now, we're considering all the different senses today, So here are some tips for you to try if you suspect that your loved one's smell is diminished. First, bump up those favorite smells. Think essential oils, preferred lotions, perfume, and put some right near the nose on the face. You can even infuse things with their favorite smells that they can hold close to their face. And double check the smoke and gas alarms for safety, because the person with dementia may not smell a problem. If you notice that your family member's not eating as well, or complaining that their favorite foods don't taste good, it could signal their sense of taste is changing. When possible, try adding sweetener to their favorite food and drinks. If sugar's a concern, you might consider honey, stevia, or other sugar substitutes. As tastes change, some favorites like bacon may taste too salty. Try some low-sodium options. Other meats may be tasteless, and you might try a sweeter sauce like barbecue to make that protein more palatable. Stay flexible and creative as your loved one's favorite food preferences could change. For instance, I know lots of caregivers who sneak some vegetables in those sweeter tomato sauces. It's a great trick. It's another good dose of vitamins and fiber. If medicines taste bad, try chasing those pills with a stronger sweet flavor. Here's a pro tip. Try a spoonful of sugar-free jam to swallow the pills. It's actually sweeter than the usual applesauce chaser, and the little bits of fruit in the jam will have your loved one clearing their mouth and getting all the bits of medicine at the same time. Lots of signs may indicate your loved one's having trouble processing touch sensation on one or more parts of their body. Remember, the touch sensation is mostly gathered through the skin, and that's a whole body coverage area. As caregivers, you can keep a close eye out for this preference. You might notice that your person with dementia is craving more touch, or they cringe with any unexpected touch. Here are some things you might try. If your person appears a bit defensive with touch, try to keep their skin covered when possible, especially if they're cold and wet. Try steady, deep pressure to calm. Examples might be a heavy blanket, or holding hands, or a soothing back rub. And of course, you can crank the heat and warm those clothes and towels and blankets in the dryer. When you notice the sense of balance is affected, go slowly, especially when the person is changing levels, like rising to sit, at the edge of the bed, or standing from a chair. Don't rush those transfers. Try singing to help with comfort, balance, and movement. In studies, singing worked even better than background music to soothe the person and help them move. The good news is you don't have to be a great singer for that. That little bit of rhythmic tune can help your loved one start to move. When possible, help the person on their level. That just means if they're seated, pull up a chair. Of course, some folks will have trouble knowing their body position and planning safe movements when the proprioceptive sense is not computing, so you can stay ready. Anticipate and guide those transfers. Support the person even when they're seated and in changing positions. Finally, that interoception will eventually be affected, making it harder for the person with dementia to understand the signals coming from inside their body, like hunger, thirst, fatigue, or the feeling, I need to get to the bathroom. Experienced caregivers will tell you, routine, routine, routine. If you haven't already built in regular opportunities to help the person use the bathroom, stay hydrated, have a snack, or take a rest break, well, routine will be your best bet. Watch for patterns and anticipate the rhythm of the day when your loved one needs or wants to do those self-care routines. Let's recap that section. The brain processes 8 senses, all of which are affected by dementia: sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, balance, body position, and internal feelings. A simulation experience like a sensory kit can mimic altered sensory processing and help us empathize with the people we support. Anticipate sensory-related challenges and fuel ideas for new or modified care strategies. Let's plug all this stuff into real life and think about some common situations when these strategies might come in handy for you. I'm curious if any of you have noticed these sensory breakdowns in the context of real-world activities. Think to yourself again. Have you had or have a family member living with dementia who has or had problems with their senses? What activities seem most challenging for them? Well, hold those real-world challenges from your own life in mind during this section. You're probably already recognizing challenges with many sensory-rich activities. That's expert noticing. Consider the sensory demands of activities like bathing, grooming, enjoying a meal, getting around the house, going places, joining a game or other leisure activity. Hey, what about riding in the car? This is a big sensory experience that we might take for granted until it's a problem. Same with socializing with friends and family, or doing chores and staying productive. Finally, think about the sensory experience just managing downtime or settling down for bed. Just imagine you dropped into this real-world challenge. Your loved one resists taking a shower or expresses discomfort during that bathing activity. If we think like detectives and trace the root of the problem, we might suspect that your person could be having trouble regulating temperature, like all the skin exposed feels too cold. Light touch is uncomfortable, so that falling water might feel tingly. Too many sounds, and the bathroom acoustics are harsh. Well, in another scenario at home, a caregiver wife expressed to me that her husband with dementia skips brushing his teeth, and he really gets irritated when she tries to help him with that grooming activity. Now, this caregiver is a great detective, so she was already doing the root cause analysis on her own. She said, "I think he's having trouble seeing items against a cluttered or all-white bathroom." She explained that everything in her bathroom's mostly white. She also suspects that his mouth is sensitive to touch. She said the toothbrush bristles are prickly. She also thought about taste altered. He keeps saying the toothpaste tastes bad or burns his mouth, and she also noticed that he has trouble understanding what he sees in the mirror. And the reflection might be messing with his balance and body position. The whole sensory overload could be why he really hates brushing his teeth. Well, here's a different sort of home care scenario. A husband is talking about his wife with dementia. She lives in an assisted living facility and gets additional assistance from a home care aide, just during mealtime because that's the most challenging part of her day. The man explained that his wife has been eating and drinking less. He's really worried about her overall nutrition and hydration. He said, "My wife seems not to enjoy meals. She appears just disengaged at mealtime. She keeps reaching for her neighbor's food or just leaving the dining room altogether." Luckily, the home care aide is an expert noticer too. The husband and the aide put their heads together and came up with some ideas about what could be causing the problem. Now, they think that her shrinking visual field might be making it difficult for the woman to see what's at her place. She sees her neighbor's plate better than her own. Things kind of disappear on the plate too because she's having trouble with color discrimination. Things disappear on the table when they're the same color. She's having trouble blocking out extra sights and sounds. She can't concentrate in the noisy, busy space. They also think she might be having trouble knowing what's happening around her because people keep approaching her from behind or overhead. Well, you're getting the point here. In every situation, there could be a combination of sensory processing issues making participation harder for the person with dementia and their caregivers. And with a little expert noticing and knowledge of different sensations, you can come up with some good ideas about what might be causing the problem in your situation. I'll run 2 more brief scenarios just to illustrate family caregivers doing this detective work. In this situation, the person becomes increasingly upset in the afternoon and asks lots of questions about what they should be doing and why their spouse is there. The person wants to leave the home, but they don't have any place to go and no safe plan to get there. After considering the person's sensory processing needs, the spouse suspects that the person's having trouble regulating internal feelings, like feeling anxious or bored. Too much downtime feels upsetting, but the person can't figure out what to do with the extra energy. The light bulb goes off for the spouse who said, "I think communicating and socializing are even harder because her body's understimulated." Finally, one more story. A grandmother with dementia has trouble settling down for bedtime and gets upset about being in her new living situation at her daughter's house. The night shift is the hardest for the daughter, who, bless her heart, is also trying to get the young ones to go to bed and stay there. Well, a little detective work revealed that Grandma could be having trouble winding down. The more tired she gets, the more restless she becomes. More reflections and shadows at nighttime are confusing to her. The daughter said all that sensory stuff was harder for her to understand the more tired she got. So we decided to start Grandma's bedtime routine a little earlier, and it was a lot easier for us all. Well, thinking back to your family member's real-world challenge, do you think sensory needs or preferences could have been contributing to the challenge in your case? For example, your loved one may be avoiding an activity because it's either overstimulating or understimulating. They may not like riding in the car because it makes them dizzy. They might refuse medicines because it tastes bad. So quick recap, then it's on to our final segment. Real-world challenges might arise from an uncomfortable or mismatched sensory experience. Awareness of a wide range of sensory-related challenges can help you notice and anticipate problems earlier. Do the detective work and figure out potential root causes of the problem. Digging down to the root of the problem requires close observation, description of the challenge in the care environment, and problem solving. Here's a little pro tip. More heads are better than one. I have a feeling this group could rattle off countless helpful strategies for these sensory-related challenges, so allow me to mention some, and hopefully these will spark more ideas from you. Here's what works for many caregivers when the old bathing routine no longer matches the person's sensory needs and preferences. Try switching from a shower to a sponge bath. Pick a more comfortable location in the house if you can. Keep the person's body covered as much as possible. Warm those towels and blankets in the dryer. Incorporate favorite scents into the bath routine. Think shampoos and lotions and soaps that they really like. And think about this, add refreshments. Favorite tastes can actually help your loved one feel more comfortable and tolerate a longer and more thorough bath. If oral care is the challenge, here are some sensory-aware care strategies to try. Tidy the area around the sink. Reduce the clutter as much as you can and place only what's needed right where the person can see things. Pick a cup, a toothbrush, washcloth, hand towel in contrasting colors. Try a softer toothbrush and milder toothpaste. Folks, when you're at the grocery store, it might mean check out the kids' stuff. It's usually more mild. Try the activity seated. If the bathroom is working against you, that space isn't working, try a more comfortable place in the home. Mealtime is another sensory demanding situation. So here are some tips to be a more sensory aware helper at mealtime. Kindly redirect your loved one to see their plate. It might help to push it forward a bit or help them place one hand on their plate. Here's another tip. Offer more finger foods, things that they can easily hold and eat. They don't have to put it down every time. Offer the meal in courses and try presenting smaller portions more frequently. Choose dishes that contrast with the table and the color of the food. And try to reduce the noise. Come closer to speak and get on their level. Pull up a chair beside the person. If concentrating to eat seems difficult for them, consider headphones with or without music during the meal. Then remove the headphones for socializing after the meal. Considering these and other challenging situations, you may have discovered more strategies that worked for you and your loved one. Maybe you modified the environment somehow, or you tailored the activity itself, or you changed your own communication or your hands-on assistance. Well, I encourage you to share your successes and other helpful tips with the other care partners on your team. To sum up, a couple of take-home messages. The purpose of compensatory sensory-based interventions is to enhance participation in meaningful activities, whether it's self-care, leisure, productive work activities, or social engagement, while reducing challenging behavioral symptoms. And a good rule of thumb is try to integrate sensory-based interventions into everyday life, not segregate or isolate them. Recapping our final section, many effective sensory-based interventions exist and can make life easier and more satisfying for people with dementia and their caregivers, including families and pros. You can choose the right sensory-based intervention by targeting the root cause of the problem. A person-centered approach helps caregivers like us create sensory experiences matched to each person's preferences, home environment, and current situation. Keep the conversation going with your care team about sensory-based interventions, what you've tried, what's working or not. When it comes to this type of detective work and creative problem solving, more heads are better than one. Again, if you or someone you know needs more support at home, we welcome your contact. Well, folks, we've made it all the way to the end. Looking back over it all, here's what we did today. We defined sensory processing and learned how sensory processing works in healthy brains and the brain with dementia. We specified dementia's impact on 8 senses and demonstrated a little sensory kit to appreciate some common sensory-related challenges. We identified some common situations when sensory processing may be the root cause of the problem. You might have thought about sensory problems or challenges you've noticed. And finally, we compiled lots of helpful interventions to improve sensory experiences. I'm inviting you to share your own real-world success stories and tips with others on your team. I would like to personally thank everyone for watching. Please share what you've learned today with anyone who you think could benefit from the information in this program. Keep in mind, caregiving is a team sport, and together we all play a valuable role in supporting people living with dementia and each other. So find your team. If you'd like more information about something you learned today, feel free to contact your local ComForCare or At Your Side Home Care. For additional resources, support for family caregivers, and specialized home care for people living with dementia, our team would love to meet you. Thanks.